I will be talking about the Lower Platte River Coalition Drought Matrix. My name is Kingsley. I'm an ES2 in the Water Planning Division. I've been in water planning since June of 2021. So a little bit of background on this project. The Lower Platte River Coalition consists of the 7 NRDs in the Lower Platte Basin. So that would be the upper and lower loop NRDs, the upper and lower Elkhorn NRDs, Lower Platte North, Lower Platte South, and Papio Missouri River. So together, these 7 NRDs have a basin water management plan. That's a voluntary basin-wide plan that's in its 2nd increment. And in the spring of this year, they approved an addendum to their plan. So they added a new objective to goal 2. And this objective says that they will evaluate the impacts of new development during drought conditions, because ultimately the goal of their basin water management plan is to sustain a balance between uses and supplies of water in the basin. And so to address this new objective, we had to ask the question, what drought planning efforts are currently underway in the Lower Platte River Basin? And these are some of the items that we were interested in terms of drought planning. So we wanted to know, do the NRDs have plans that outline how often they should be monitoring for drought conditions? Do they have education and outreach programs to reach their stakeholders regarding drought? What indicators are they using to monitor drought? So are they using their static water levels? Are they looking at stream flow? Are they looking at the weekly US drought monitor or others? Does the plan have drought categories? So does the plan have, the US drought monitor has drought level 0 through 4. Does it have something similar to that? And then we were also interested in, do these plans have mitigation and response actions? So underneath that, are the mitigation and response actions aligned with the drought categories, or are these actions just general recommendations that their stakeholders can implement year-round? Are these actions optional or required? Are there steps that the NRDs have to take under the plans during drought conditions, or again, are they suggestions? And then we wanted to know which plans actually assessed how much money it would cost to implement the mitigation actions. And did these plans also assess the amount of water that the actions would produce? And then we had to determine, okay, what plans are we looking at? And we landed on a list of several different types of plans. So some, but not all of the NRDs within the Lower Platte have their own drought plans. They have obviously the basin-wide plan, which outlines the objective to assess drought. Each of the NRDs also has a voluntary IMP, and all of the NRDs are required to have groundwater management plans and rules and regulations. They're also required to have master plans and long-range implementation plans. And then they also have hazard mitigation plans, which includes more than drought, many of which are also multi-jurisdictional. So some of these NRDs have, it's not just the NRD, but also includes plans for cities within the NRD. So we had to consider more than just the NRD because we're looking at the basin scale. So we looked at the state level. The state has a drought plan. Each of the NRDs have, not all, but most of the plans listed in the left. And then we looked at the city of Lincoln, Omaha, Norfolk, Fremont, and Wahoo, some of the relevant cities within the basin. So I included this slide because, depending on who you ask, Smartsheet is either a great tool or a waste of time. So I thought it would be important to include, what worked well, what features of Smartsheet worked well for this project. And I think it sort of falls under two main categories. So you have the data management and the collaboration. In terms of data management, what really worked well is the ability to set different column types. And I'll show this in a bit, but you can record different types of data. So you can record numbers, you can record dates, you can have drop downs, which is really helpful when you're filtering. You can also do conditional formatting. So if a cell meets or does not meet a certain criteria, you can change the formatting of other cells. And then, like I mentioned, you can filter. So one of the ways in which we used this was you have a column that specifies which NRDs are involved, and then you can create a filter that says, I only want to look at the plans that involve Lower Platte South NRD, for example. And that was really useful for later when we wanted the NRDs to just focus on their own plans. It was easier to just filter it out and place it in a sheet so they could focus on only those. In terms of collaboration, what's really great about Smartsheet is you can have multiple people editing in one document at the same time. And you can also set collaborator types. So you can determine who gets what sort of access to your documents. So as the owner, when you're sharing a document, you can say, I only want this person to be able to view this, or I want this person to be able to comment, or this person can edit, but they can't share it with other people. Or you can say, I want this person to be able to edit and share. So that was really helpful when we were sharing out with the NRDs, asking them to give us feedback. We could sort of restrict their access to some of the documents that we wanted them to look at, but not change. And then where I think data management and collaboration intersect is when you have forms. So forms, it's like the IT assistance request form. You can sort of write instructions that help people fill out rows, or basically create new entries in your sheet. And that was really helpful for distributing some of the plans throughout the division to have people help me review all of these plans. And Smartsheet also has a feature called Workspaces, where you can put all of your documents into one folder. And then you can share that folder with everyone who needs to have access to it. And then when you create new documents in that workspace, everyone who has access to the workspace will automatically get access to those new documents. So when we were doing the setup, there were a number of considerations that we needed to make before starting to fill it out. So we wanted to think about what types of data do we want to record. And like I mentioned, we wanted to record the drought planning efforts, but we also were interested in, what type of plan is this? When was it published? Who's involved? Who has decision-making power in enforcing this plan? So general plan description things. Who's entering the data? Like I mentioned, it wasn't just me reviewing and entering in all of the plans. I needed to get help, and that was what the form was useful for. Who's accessing the data? So that would be the coalition, their technical committee specifically, who's later on going to be developing some drought scenarios potentially. And then why are we capturing this data? It comes down to the evaluation of drought impacts that's described in the basin-wide plan. So that being said, I'm going to switch over to Smartsheet, and hopefully everyone on Zoom can now see Smartsheet coming up instead of my presentation. If you can't, please let me know. So I'm going to assume that's a yes. So this is the main drought matrix sheet. So you can see over here, we have, oh, okay, thank you. So we have all of the plans. I have these alphabetized. And you can see I have plan type, and this is a drop down. Like I mentioned, you can change the column properties over here to select a drop down list. And then we have the plan geographic extent, the participants, the decision-making organization, the plan publication date. We recorded when we were making the entry, just so we can keep an eye on some older entries. And then we get into the drought planning efforts. So is there a drought monitoring protocol? Yes or no? You can see that this is where some of the conditional formatting starts. So where we have the yes, you can see that this has an entry here, and this one says no, and so the field is grayed out, and you know that that's not relevant. Drought education and outreach, drought categories defined, and drought indicators. I had a field for the number of drought categories, and based on some early review, was able to determine that the plans within the Lower Platte Basin have typically no more than 5 drought categories. So I have columns here for both the name of the drought category as it's described in the plan, and then the thresholds to reach that category based on the indicators. So if you're looking at river flow, see this one is river flow is less than 200 CFS, and water use is greater than 55 million gallons per day. And that is described as a critical shortage. And then we get on to the drought mitigation and response actions. If the mitigation and response action was according to drought category, a yes here, you would re-enter in the number of drought categories and then fill in the mitigation and response actions by category. If they were just general recommendations, you have the mitigation and response action details in this column here. Finally, we have some of the questions on, was there a financial assessment of the mitigation and response actions, and did they assess how much water is produced from these actions? Switch back to PowerPoint. Now I'm going to show the workspace. So that spreadsheet is only one of a number of items that we have contained within the workspace, some of which we presented to the NRDs and some of which were just for me to keep track of what work was done and needed to be done, or just some presentation materials that we were working on. So you have the main sheet here, and we have some reports. Have another separate sheet that kept track of all of the plans that we had looked at and, you know, linked to all of the plans, and separate folders for the NRD sheets that I will talk about. I think that's the next slide on my presentation, is to talk about how the NRDs reviewed this. So I need to get a Smartsheet. So for the review process, what we did is we decided to take the information in the master spreadsheet and break it out into sheets per NRD. And then we shared each sheet with the relevant technical committee members. And they had editing access on these sheets. And one of the great things about sharing through Smartsheet is that you don't have to ask anybody to make a Smartsheet account in order to share with them. If you send a sharing invitation, that person can log in and view and edit and do whatever they have access to without needing to make an account first. So that was a really helpful feature for this project because we didn't have to ask any of the technical committee members to make accounts. So I just shared it with their email address, sent them an email, and then they received access to come into these sheets and look at them, review the attachments. Over here, you could see that there is an attachment on each row that contains the plan that we looked at, and review the entries in each row. And you can see I have highlighted here some of the rows that the technical committee member had uploaded a new plan. You can see come into here, and that there is a new attachment made by the technical committee member onto this row. So we had each of the NRDs do this on their sheets, and I set it up an automatic notification. So I set it up so at the end of the day, when there were changes made to any of these NRD sheets, it would send me an email and would highlight any additions or changes that they made so I could go in, review those, and then update the main spreadsheet. And that was really helpful to sort of do a little bit of version control. We wanted to make sure that our main spreadsheet stayed the way it was until we had a chance to review any changes that they made and then update as needed. So now that we have had all of the NRDs review the sheet and make their comments, upload new versions of plans, the next task for the technical committee is to reassess this new objective in the basin-wide plan that says evaluate impacts of new development during drought conditions, and basically take the information that we have gathered and determine how they incorporate those into their modeling efforts. So I have bolded here, evaluate the hydrologic impacts of drought planning activities in the basin. And I think that would be a good place for them to start based on the information that we have already gathered so that they can start addressing more of these action items. Oh, that is the wrong, sorry, this is not the correct slide. Hang on. I must have pulled up an outdated version of the presentation, which is wonderful. I'll get that pulled up here. But, you know, what we learned from this project in terms of both using Smartsheet and throughout the process, we found that Smartsheet was really helpful for sharing the information with the NRDs. It definitely a lot easier than trying to pass an Excel spreadsheet back and forth. It's also great for collaboration within the division or the department, that you can have multiple people working on one document at the same time, instead of, you know, having to juggle that back and forth as well. And then just throughout the process, here, I have my correct version pulled up this time. Sorry about that. I don't know why that was outdated. So we really wanted to make sure that we were thorough in like developing the Smartsheet template itself before we started to enter in the data. So that included having multiple meetings discussing, these are the categories that we have that we want to assess. Is there anything that we have not considered? Because we didn't want to start reviewing plans and get halfway through this list of 50 plus plans and then realize that there were other things that we wanted to look for, and then have to go back through those plans that we already looked at and sort of do them all again. And so we wanted to make sure that we really nailed the format of the Smartsheet down before going through the review process. Another thing, just making sure that we left enough time throughout the process for both data entry and feedback. You know, we gave the coalition about a month and a half to review their sheet of no more than 10 items, and they're all busy people. You know, some of them were worried that they wouldn't quite have the time to look through it all, but you know, we all were able to manage that, and it didn't turn out to be a problem. But just making sure that we were in communication with the coalition to make sure that, you know, everyone has enough time to actually get everything done and do it thoroughly. One thing that I didn't show while I was in Smartsheet that I can go back and show is the dynamic reporting feature. So another thing that I think will help with the next steps is that you can pull from one sheet or many sheets into a report. So you can basically pull as many columns as you want into a report. And as you update those source sheets, the report will be updated as well. And you can sort of do some additional sorting and filtering to really highlight the information that you are interested in. So I can show that in a minute, but a couple of people asked me what training I did in order to start this project. And I would say that Smartsheet is pretty easy to use. You just need to sort of test the features out for yourself. I did do the Smartsheet essential training through LinkedIn Learning, but I didn't find that I needed any more than that to really get started with Smartsheet. You just have to look at what's there in terms of features and customization, automation, and forms to really find out what works best for your project. Smartsheet also has help forums, and some of their features, if you hover over like a button, there will be a link to a tutorial video that'll tell you how to use the feature. So there's a lot of built-in help in Smartsheet that can show you how to use certain features if you're not sure. So I can go back into Smartsheet and show the dynamic reports that I mentioned. And I think this is where the coalition can start to filter out some of the most important information for developing their scenarios. So in this report, I have narrowed out or pulled out of the main spreadsheet the drought categories and mitigation and response actions. So these are some of the more quantitative, you know, this is like river flow between 3,000 and 1,500 CFS. These are some of the numbers that they can start to use. So they can say river flow is this amount at this location at this time, etc. So they can start to evaluate these drought plans and the drought planning efforts in the basin. So that is the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Caitlin, I've got a question.
Okay.
You on one of the slides learned or said what Smartsheet is good for.
Mhm.
Are there any applications where you think an Excel spreadsheet would be the like instead of using Smartsheet, where like even collaboratively like an Excel spreadsheet would still be the better tool for it?
Yeah, I think one of the main downsides with Smartsheet that I have discovered, you could work around this, but essentially one sheet in Smartsheet is one giant table. So instead of Excel, where you can have several tables on one worksheet in Smartsheet, that's a lot of sheet, is just one giant table. So
Okay.
that's where I would say it's a lot easier to use Excel if you're trying to like have multiple tables that record different types of information regarding one subject.
Okay.
But where you might be able to work around that for Smartsheet, depending on how much information you have, is you could have a couple different sheets that sort of fit those different tables. So say you have something that I've been working on is contract tracking.
Right.
Say you are tracking some dollar numbers and maybe some quantitative project benefits, and you have two tables that relate to one contract. A potential workaround that you could do is say you have one sheet in Smartsheet for the financials, one for the project benefits, and then you could pull from both of those sheets into one report.
Okay.
So it just really depends on the type of project that you're doing, the amount of information that you have, and especially if you're trying to share and get feedback from a bunch of other people, I would suggest giving Smartsheet a try because of the sharing capabilities and the ability to set permissions or have collaborator types. But in some scenarios, it might just come down to the fact that it's easier to use Excel.
Gotcha.
Most people have more experience with Excel than Smartsheet, and it depends on the project.
Well, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, then, Caitlin, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you.